Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Damage Report with me, John and Earl, and also Jayar Jackson in the studio.
Wow, hey, you know what? Jayar Wednesdays, first of all.
It is.
Let's go ahead and continue. Let's continue this theme because we know what's going on. What happens every Wednesday? Something big happens.
Something big. That's true.
Wednesday.
Big News Wednesdays.
It's crazy.
That's what it is.
It's not my fault.
And it is today. Big news, maybe even good news. But I can't really. Like, it happens so rarely that I can't really identify when it happens for sure. It's an unfamiliar feeling, but we're gonna talk it out. We're gonna talk about what happened last night in Iraq. Also, the president's address this morning, and then we're gonna move into other news, economic news, but also fundraising news. And we are gonna be talking about Australia. Eric Byler was in Australia. He's gonna tell us about his experience there. And also, there's been a massive amount of online fundraising around the bushfires in Australia. Some of the people involved in that fundraising have experienced some negative ramifications of that, having to do with their line of work. So we're gonna be describing that for you a little bit later on. But before we get to all that, let's start with last night. We knew that Iran was going to retaliate in some way for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and last night that actually happened. With more than a dozen missiles launched from Iran, striking 2 air bases in Erbil and Al-Assad, west of Baghdad. It was unclear as of last night if there had been any casualties. We now know, supposedly, there were no casualties. So good news there for all of the people, both American and Iraqi, serving at those bases. We have a map here showing the 2 parts of Iraq that were struck, with one being up in the northern area and one being just slightly west, I guess, of Baghdad there. And so both areas struck, although not equally. Now, we know that Iran's supreme leader said that the attack was a, quote, slap in the face for the US and called for an end to the US presence in the Middle East. Get in line. A lot of people have been calling that for a long time. Doesn't seem like it's gonna happen anytime soon. We also have the foreign secretary for Iran saying that Iran took and concluded proportionate measures in self-defense under Article 51 of UN Charter, targeting base from which cowardly armed attack against our citizens and senior officials were launched. We do not seek escalation or war, but we'll defend ourselves against any aggression. Now, assuming that this was the entirety of the Iranian response, and I don't necessarily assume that, but if that were the entirety of it, this does seem arguably proportional to what happened.
Right, I mean, they said that, they hit some targets. Way it's been, I think, seen or reported at least is, this was kind of a planned non-lethal attack that would kind of put America on notice, and then allow them to also have covering up to say, we did something, you guys. Now it's over as long as they calm down. So, and then we'll get to what Trump ended up having to say, but it gets both sides to at least say, hey, the other guys are the cowards. Hey, they're the ones who back down. And I mean, if it's a matter of just as telling the people that are nearest to you that your own ego has been quelled, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But so I guess we're still looking into exactly the potential future ramifications, which again, of course, we'll get into as well. And if this has a full de-escalation approach or just as of yesterday, de-escalation.
Yeah, and look, the best case scenario is that the generally simple-minded, small-minded people that lead our countries, both in the US and Iran, who are so obsessed with the perception of themselves and their strength and their legacy and all that stuff that means absolutely nothing to the people who live or die based on their decisions, that hopefully everyone on both sides will feel like, I look good coming out of this, and that's where it'll end. Yeah. So the best case scenario is that these childish individuals will feel placated and will stop playing games with our lives. That's what we hope for. Now, as of last night, Iran threatened to attack inside the US if America retaliated for that specific assault. They've also vowed to attack the cities of Dubai in the UAE and Haifa in Israel if Iranian soil is bombed. Now, we know as of this morning that apparently theoretically is not going to happen, which is of course good, both for sites inside of the US and for other people in the region. Now, when this actually happened, Donald Trump responded to it and very reassuring tweet saying, all is well, missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good. We have the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world by far. I will be making a statement tomorrow morning. And so look, as of this morning, supposedly no one died or was even injured in that attack. And so that is good news. For me personally, the way I interpret it in the moment is None of this would be happening if not for Donald Trump's actions that senior officials in the Pentagon were stunned by. And so for him to tweet, "All is well," when we still don't know at that point if American service members might have been killed as a result of his fun and games abroad. It seems a very casual response to the seriousness of what was going on.
That's how he operates in anything. When you've never been held responsible for anything in your life, nothing is serious. Nothing actually has real ramifications or consequences because he's never experienced those things. Others have, as a result of his actions, his decisions, many times throughout his life, have had life-changing effects to his decisions, and it continues. So, of course, from his point of view, it's all as well. I dodged that bullet. I went through the whole process of escalating these tensions. After escalating them, and then carrying out the killing of this military leader, then I'm gonna go ahead and try and rile them up further because I need to go ahead and pump my ego up. So all that happening, he's like, whew, I got out of it without anything happening. So in his mind, all is well. All is just good and dandy. There's people involved. But who cares? They're just people. They're not me.
Yeah, and let's bear in mind, all was always going to be well for him. There were no consequences that he was going to suffer for any of this, no matter what. Anyway, so look, I just want to briefly go back to the state of mind when we were last night. We get home, we get off work finally, blessedly. We go home. This starts to happen. What did you think when you saw that this was happening?
Well, okay. Because I was trying not to be the guy that would say it this way, but I've been annoyed at the World War III hashtags for days. Not because you shouldn't do it, say what you want. Maybe that helps get people into the mindset of thinking how serious this could be, although I don't think it get to that level. But if nothing else, if it worked as a deterrent, or for some people to think, hey, we should pay attention to this, I'm all on board because it was just a hashtag. Let's keep it at least in context. But I mean, I was thinking that it would, they would actually do some damage, maybe to some of our interests, and maybe even personnel, or in Iraqi personnel as well, which we heard some few reports of some casualties with Iraqis, which I thought was bad enough. And I honestly was predicting that Trump would then go to a it wasn't that bad de-escalation point of view, because I don't think
you didn't think so.
I thought so the whole time. But it's hard to say. You don't know what mindset he was in. So when Mark Esper and Mike Pompeo come in, I think Esper was the one who was carrying like a large bag they kept showing. His national security advisors come in and try to tell him what to do, or maybe advise him on what to do next. They're potentially going to write up something from due last night. And the whole time I was thinking this is going to be a lowering tensions type of statement. But then with we're the strongest, which is basically what this morning's conversation was. There was something that changed though, because they all just left in the middle of the night, and I think we saw it, and we'll talk about it when it comes to what he actually said this morning. But I guess to answer your question in a long way, I felt we were a little bit too heightened. It definitely could have gotten as bad as it was looking, but I didn't think it would get there. And I had no real concrete reason why to believe that, honestly.
Okay, I would argue we're not done just yet, but I would say, look, to the extent that we were obviously, I was very worried about this going, in a much worse direction, and I'm not sorry for that at all. The internet freaked out about Sonic's teeth for like a week. I think we can freak out about the possibility of war between two major military powers.
And I think it helps to freak out about it, even if it's unnecessary to so much.
And especially because it's Trump. I mean, after all, so he said, if they strike us, we are going to take out 52 sites, including sites of cultural importance or whatever. And I said, that is a stupid threat to make, even if it wasn't promising war crimes, because one of two things is either gonna happen. Either you've put yourself in a position where you now need to do it, or you need to back off of that threat. And with Trump, he's so worried about what people think about him that I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to just back off that threat. So they struck us. Thankfully, he didn't stick to what he had been threatening, promising to do, but he could have. And again, it was a situation we were in that did not need to happen. There was, this whole news cycle could have been gone and nobody would have missed it. If he had never struck Soleimani, there would have been no increased tensions. Last night wouldn't have happened at all. It's not like we were forced into this situation except by Donald Trump's actions.
That's true.
And so I do want to talk about one other thing that happened last night though. So last night, in addition to the strike against 2 bases where American military personnel were operating in Iraq, there was also a massive loss of life, and that involved a Ukrainian passenger jet. It was carrying more than 170 people from Tehran. It suddenly plummeted into a field early Wednesday without a mayday from the cockpit, killing all aboard. So it had been traveling from Iran to Ukraine. You can see in this map how little distance it actually covered before it crashed. In the aftermath of the crash, Ukraine banned all flights from Iranian airspace. A similar move was already taken by several other countries amid the tensions between Iran and US. Now, depending on which source you go to, the nationalities and the total number of people might be different, but we believe that there were 176 victims, including 82 Iranians, 63 Canadians, Ukrainians, Swedes, Afghans, Germans, and Britons as well. And I know that at the time, a lot of people felt like the fact that this is happening, like major air crashes like this are not common occurrences. For this to happen in this part of the world at that exact time made a lot of people incredibly nervous about what it could represent.
Yeah, and hopefully, and what it seems to, there's nothing good coming out of this, but what it seems to have been is a pretty bad coincidence. At this point, again, it's been like several hours. And also I read it that the Ukrainian government first put out the statement that was agreeing that it was potentially just an engine failure or some kind of a malfunction with the technology on the plane, but then they've taken that statement back because they want to go ahead and investigate to make sure that it's not something else, which again, we hope that it wasn't, because then that gives us an extra layer to this disaster and this catastrophe already. But also there was a previous crash from, not almost a crash, but a Southwest Airlines flight in 2018 that was the same kind. So there was the issues about the 737 MAX model, but this wasn't it. This is
a different model.
737 NG, which had its other issues, which I think led to the problems with this one. Potentially, whenever there's an engine failure, the propellers inside turn into basically a bomb, shrapnel, to destroy the rest of the plane, and that casing is supposed to contain it. That problem was discovered a while ago after the 2018 crash of this same type.
Yeah.
And who knows if that was ever actually taken care of, because Boeing wasn't necessarily going through the full process to really remedy the problem.
Yeah, now bear in mind, I like to give this caveat, literally anytime there's some sort of accident like this, air travel is overwhelmingly safe. Yes, crashes do happen, but statistically it is like the safest form of transportation in the world. It is a very natural human psychological response to see something like this and think, oh, this is representative of what air travel is like. That is not the case. So we feel a need, because of the terrible loss of life, to talk about this, but we do so at the risk of potentially convincing people of something that is not true. This does not mean that air travel is not safe, okay? So just understand that.
But the reason it's not, the reason it is safe is because there's so many precautions taking place to make sure that things are done on a way that's on the up and up, and there's some fractures in that. Not widespread, but there's some fractures in it, and they have to take care of it.
Exactly. And look, I know some people were incredibly worried when they first read about this, because if you know about the history of the US and Iran passenger jets being shot down in times like this, that is a very sensitive subject, obviously. And just to confirm, there is no indication yet that that is what happened. It is being talked about as if it is a technical failure, and we will of course see. Now, understand that there had been passenger airlines avoiding flying over Iran because of the risk that they could be mistaken for military aircraft. I'm assuming that will now become a more common practice in the region as we go forward. We do know that the 2 black boxes, which as of this morning have been recovered, are not going to be made available to the US. All the news coverage of it talks about that. I don't know why they would. It's a Ukrainian, Iranian thing. But apparently both Iran and Ukraine will be looking into this. And we also know that the aircraft involved was just 3 years old. It was purchased from the manufacturer as new by Ukraine International Airlines. It had had its last routine technical maintenance on Monday. So just bear that in mind as well.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously sad no matter what, tremendous loss of life. And it's a reminder that while we were obviously very worried about the possibility of more widespread military conflict between the US and Iran, far more people have now died in the recent past as a result of this single terrible tragedy. Okay, we are gonna take a short break though. When we come back, Donald Trump's address this morning after this.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, The host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer.
That is reassuring coming from Donald Trump this morning. Now, we had been waiting since last night when Iran struck 2 bases where American military personnel were operating to see what he would have to say. And he did say some things. He tried to say a lot of things. And I will say, we're gonna go through some specifics, Jayar and I will say that overall, there are worse speeches he could have given.
Okay.
I mean, as small of a person as he is, as cruel and xenophobic a person as he is, he could have simply said, yeah, no, we're sending everyone. We're sending 1 million troops. That could have happened. And so I think that a lot of the media is rushing to give praise to a person who has become very talented in manipulating them into doing that. But that said, it could have been worse.
Yeah, it's true. And he hit the points that we would assume he would hit. So, I mean, I guess there's no surprises in here, except for the fact that it wasn't as incendiary as he's prone to be.
Yeah, it was slightly incendiary towards the Iranians. I would say it was more incendiary towards Barack Obama, as we'll get to. But there were a few pieces of good news in this. So let's go through a little bit of that. So the first quote we want to focus on, he said, "I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy." I don't like the use of the word grateful there. "No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We sustained no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases." So, bit of good news number one is that Donald Trump's completely needless raising of tensions with Iran has not yet cost any American service members their lives. So that is a good bit of news.
Right.
Saying that we should be grateful, this didn't need to happen at all. I'm not grateful for any of this.
Grateful to whom?
I guess grateful that Iran, and there's different interpretations of whether this was a somewhat failed attack or if this was a move that they made to give Trump a face-saving way to back off of tensions. People believe that might be the case. Regardless of what the case is, thankfully, no one yet has been killed as a result of Donald Trump's adventures abroad.
Yeah, so I guess I'm still stuck on the grateful part. I mean, I know it's a seems like a small deal, but just a better choice of words generally works. When you're the president, and you're making these announcements to the country, and then about something everyone was on the edge of their seats trying to figure out what was going on last night. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a way for him to do it, or if they write for him a way to make sure that he feels okay with not saying, yeah, so it was a bit of a mistake. And luckily we made it out without anything happening, and now we can go ahead and move on to maybe something else.
Which is sort of, at least how I'm taking the full situation. He also said Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world. So look, it is far from confirmed whether we are truly standing down, let alone Iran. I mean, after all, in the initial, after he struck Soleimani, while hypothesizing how Iran might respond, overt, obvious military action was never the most likely consequence. It was far more likely that asymmetric, generally hidden or proxy attacks were more likely. Those are still entirely possible. Hopefully that does not happen, but that's still possible. But let's say, just for hypothetically, this is the end of it. Okay, how do you respond to that? if we go back to the status quo, which was already unfortunately worse, in a number of different ways than under Barack Obama, because we had previously had the Iran nuclear accords, which he shredded for no reason whatsoever. Right. So if we're back to that status quo.
Back to him after shredding the Iran nuclear.
Yes, but no actual war with Iran.
Well, something else has to be done. I mean, it's one of those things where you're content for the moment because of how bad it could have gotten. Things can always get worse. And I think there was a few generals that were on last night during coverage on different cable networks that were saying it's very easy to heighten into war, but then it's really tough to get out. So at least we haven't gotten to that point where there's a point of no return. There's this line and there's still a chance to return from, which it seems like they're trying to shoot for. But even after that, we're not even forgetting, but we're ignoring the fact that the previous situation is what led to these tensions. It's not like, and again, I'm not saying it started there. We know there's been decades worth of tensions and proxy things that are happening, and people claiming responsibility that maybe didn't necessarily have it or didn't originate with them. We know all that is happening. But at least at this point, you have to have some way to take it back from the biggest moments, which one of those was, of course, Trump coming in, ripping up those Iran, the deal.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can buy enough time that gets discussed further, or we get a chance to see his level of incompetence, because he has promises he made about building walls and tax relief for middle class Americans, all those things that he came in and said he was going to do, that then after he did the opposite, claimed to accomplish them anyway. We're going to see what what the agenda will come after that. Will he change his mind on that? Absolutely not, he won't.
Yeah. And I think you get into one of two ways that I know that overall, great news that he hasn't yet launched us into a full-scale war. That's great. But two ways that things are not quite as stable or as safe as people are implying coming out of the speech. One is that status quo where he got us out of the deal that everyone seemed to agree that Iran was abiding by. It stopped them from developing nuclear weapons. They still are backing off of the restrictions on enrichment. That news came out a couple of days ago. We've had no reversal on that. That combined with Donald Trump, literally the first words he said in his address this morning was, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and thanks to me, they never will. Well, if he plans to stick by that, first of all, he doesn't actually care about that goal, because if he did, he would have left the deal in place. But they are now free to pursue nuclear weapons. And so if that is the justification for military force, it'll be necessary to stop them from developing nuclear weapons, that's still a possibility in the near future.
It's not, it's the only way you can approach it this way is to ignore reality. Because we saw the situation the way it was when the deal was still in place, and we see the situation afterwards. There was literal points that happened. Again, once the deal was put in place, you can complain about the money that was given and what the terms people use, left on a tarmac and piles of cash on the tarmac. Come on. So those are visual cues to give people reason to have disdain for something that had potential roots to work. And then so in order to back off of it, you have to be fed lies and mischaracterizations of exactly what is happening. And that's probably going to continue.
Yeah, now the other thing I think that makes us a little bit less stable than a lot of people are taking from this address is that he did announce that the US will be imposing additional economic sanctions against Iran. In his words, until they change their behavior. But I don't know how I or the Iranian government is supposed to interpret that, considering that the Iran deal took off previous economic sanctions. The idea being that so long as they abided by the terms of the deal, they would not be sanctioned. Well, they did abide by the deal, and then they got sanctioned anyway. And so why would they change their behavior in this case? And I understand overall when people say that this is a de-escalation, I get what they mean in a military sense. But this is an economic escalation against Iran. Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted earlier today, this is economic warfare, that's what it is. People will die as a result of these sanctions. That is a thing that happens. And so this is not the worst sort of escalation, but it's not a 100% de-escalation either. Iran still will likely feel that they need to respond in some fashion to what Trump has done today.
So now the questions that need to be asked every time either Mike Pompeo, Mark Esper, or Donald Trump gets in front of a camera is, what is the end game? What does that mean? As you already pointed out, what does it mean that Iran needs to stop its rogue actions, whatever term they use? Stop it to what degree? What are the parameter points? When it comes to conflicts and international conflicts overseas and potential military action, there are normal, conclusive, direct, specific things that probably need to be taken care of before things feel Like they've lowered enough. Just say until they stop. Until they stop what and when? What are you talking about? So details need to be asked, and if they can't answer that question, we're going to see how much they really planned for this agenda.
And I'm going to give one other warning too, because right now it seems like, okay, Trump seems satisfied. He feels like big, strong guy, got what he wanted. But we know what Trump does. Trump says something like this, and then he goes home and he watches TV. And he dwells, and we'll see what he thinks about the news coverage that he gets as a result of this. I mean, remember, the bombing that killed Soleimani, that was apparently, according to insiders, according to New York Times reporting, that was a result of, he had previously announced those airstrikes that killed like 25 militia members. And it seemed like that was the response to the death of that American contractor. But then, in the words of the insiders, he sat and he dwelled over the news coverage and then felt like he needed to do something more. And so he went with that option that stunned Pentagon officials. And so today, maybe he feels satisfied. But if he doesn't like the way that the media is covering this, who knows what might happen? And I will say for some of the media, if you've been watching Fox News over the past few days, most of them are not going to be happy with this development. Sean Hannity was calling for the full force of the US military to be used against Iran as of last night. Pete Hegseth was ecstatic at the possibility that culturally important sites would be destroyed. They were bloodthirsty, and maybe they'll be placated with a so-called win for Donald Trump. Maybe that'll be enough. But they were hoping for something far more. And we know how influential some of them are. Sean Hannity, Pete Hegseth, Fox and Friends, those are his closest advisors. So we'll see what effect they have over the next few days.
And also Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson, which in some points voiced some reservations about the situation, and maybe that's their approach, knowing that he listens to them as foreign policy experts, and like, hey, let's let him know that maybe that's not the best idea, but you have to phrase it in a way that makes it seem like only he benefits from making the move to back down, not from anyone else. It has to go back to being about him.
I agree. Okay, we are gonna take another break. Stick around, more after this. Okay, when it comes to Trump's trade war and his tariffs, there has been a lot of misinformation flying around, almost all of it coming from Donald Trump. And so I hope for the last time, we want to lay out the evidence on what effect these tariffs have actually had on the US and China, just to be 100% clear. And we have to respond to lies like these. Trump saying, I think our tariffs are very good for us. We're taking in tens of billions of dollars. China is paying for it. That is a very specific statement. He said it's coming in by the billions. We never got 10 cents from China. He means before, apparently we are now. He said the tariffs have cost nothing in my opinion. And I'm not interested in your opinion though. And we're not paying for the tariffs. China's paying for the tariffs for the 100th time. Okay. So for the 100th time, he has made a claim like that, or maybe even more. All told, he made that same false claim at least 16 times in tweets, 14 times in media interviews, 78 times during public speeches or in comments to reporters. In one form or another, he made that claim about tariffs about once every 3.5 days. And it's been fact checked over and over and over again. Here's just one, there's many of them, but you can see the fact check about his claims of gains from tariffs. And here's the thing, we've talked about this before, that just purely in terms of what a tariff is and how it operates, it has never made any sense that China would pay for it. That is literally not what tariffs are. But in case anyone still thinks that's the way it works, let's run through some of the study that has been done of the actual effects of his trade war and those tariffs. A recent UN study showed that the ongoing trade war is, quote, hurting both countries, the US and China, by cutting the US import of Chinese goods by more than a quarter and also driving up prices for American consumers. Again, that's American consumers. Based on a working paper authored by economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, they concluded that American buyers paid for approximately 100% of the Trump administration's tariffs. So this is no longer hypothetical. I mean, that should have been enough because we know what tariffs are. But now they've been going back and looking at the actual evidence from a couple of years of this trade war. We didn't just pay for some or most of these tariffs. We've paid for almost 100%, and it has been hurting us terribly ever since.
So from someone like Trump, again, who has never had to pay for anything, consequences especially, when he said the tariffs have cost nothing, in my opinion, his opinion is that he hasn't had to deal with it in any kind of way. So of course, when he doesn't have to feel any of the brunt of anything, it's okay. This is the standing standard for everything he does. Does it affect me? The only way things get paid for is if he gets bad news, bad press in the news cycle. If he somehow isn't in power anymore or doesn't have authority over people, that's his monetary gains here. So as long as people continue to buy the craziness that he says, he's still winning. Of course, like you said, it's 108 times he pushed this propaganda. That's how things like that work. You've heard a million times. China's paying for it. We also heard that Mexico's paying for a wall. We heard all these things. We heard that he's and I mentioned in the last block how much he's done for the American people, how much he's done for black workers, how much he's done for women and Latinos. He's done none of these things, but he says it a million times. So that eventually, when you get into any kind of discussion with someone who's heard it, they just repeat the same talking points, but they don't have to have any basis behind it. They don't have to actually have the numbers to prove it. They just have to go, President said China's paying for it. Then he said China's paying for it. After that, he said China's paying for it. So therefore, that's all I can say, that China's paying for it. So China must be paying for it.
And that's the sort of thing that when we criticize these news sites, Twitter accounts that just have a picture of Trump as a tweet and it says President Trump, China's paying for the tariffs or whatever. And those sites will be like, well, it's up to the people to decide. We're just reporting what the president said. That is newsworthy. It's the president. No, when you spread in misinformation like that, it has an effect. Hearing things, even if you heard that it was untrue, it can lead people to it's a normalized notion. And that's why there's a couple of reasons why we want to return to this. One, I want to make sure that everybody knows that it's false, but also, this is a completely needless thing, this trade war, these tariffs. He just decided one day that he was going to do it. And it should hurt him. The fact that this is hurting the American economy, it is killing jobs, it's reducing people's spending power. I don't want, whether it's impeachment or if it's the conflict with Iran, these sorts of things can take over the news for days or weeks at a time. And there's this idea that the economy is doing very well. And I know what the news means when they say that stock market, the prices are going up a little bit. But for regular Americans, the people who are affected by things like these tariffs, it is not going well. And I don't think that any president should be able to simply send a few missiles somewhere and cause people to forget about the damage that he just up and chose to do to the American consumer.
He even had to admit it in some kind of way when he said he had to bail out farmers and from the damage he did to them based off of the
And he
tariff.
said China paid for that.
Just give, it doesn't matter, because he can cover it up and say, hey, it's not me, it's someone else, and enough people will buy it.
Yeah.
So, except for the people who openly said, hey, we don't want the handout, we want to continue to work and make the money we were making and do it on a normal basis.
Yeah, frustrating. Okay, we are gonna take one more break. When we come back, Eric Byler is gonna join us. He's been in Australia, he's gonna tell us about the situation with the fires there after this. Feels like we've been talking about these fires in Australia now for months, but we wanted to get an idea of what it's been like on the ground from someone who's actually experienced it. And so we're now joined by one of those people, award-winning film director and freelance journalist, Eric Byler. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Thank you, John.
Great to have you here. And so you now live in Australia, correct?
Yeah, I've been here about a year.
Okay, and so you did a write-up about the experience of dealing with these fires for The Intercept. It's a great read, people should definitely check it out. Give us a little bit of an idea of what it was like as this situation began to develop several months ago.
Oh, well, several months ago, I was living my idyllic Australian life. We have 2 little kids, and I was very much focused on just having the best family life and meeting the Australian relatives, and the environment here is great. Just the culture. There's so many beautiful places to go and see, and so I wasn't terribly focused on politics, even though it was my job when I worked for you guys. And it was just we had a great life. It all started to change when the smoke started to waft in from the bushfires.
How long ago was that?
I would say maybe 6 weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it affected us in terms of like, well, it's very hot, but we can't open the windows because then the smoke will come in. So which is more important? Do you want to have smoke in the house and be cooler, or do you want to be really hot and have good air to breathe? And in terms of our daily life, that was about all it was affecting us. Of course, we knew that the smell of smoke meant death and destruction and sorrow and tragedy for other people and for animals. But sort of like other things that happen around the world, if you're a young parent and you have young kids, you feel like your first responsibility is to them, and you just kind of focus on making everything right in your home. And that's what I thought my job was at the time.
And so, look, we've shown footage of the fires. We know about the number of animals that have been killed. I believe around 25 humans as well. But as you mentioned, the smoke for a lot of people who are not immediately being affected by the fires, that is a serious health risk as well. Tell me a little bit, how bad is the air quality there, and for how long have you had to deal with it?
Well, okay, so Canberra is the capital of Australia, and it has its own territory that is nestled within New South Wales. And if you've been following the fire, New South Wales is where most of the fires have been burning. It actually all really got much worse in the last week or so, 10 days or so. Well, starting December 30th was, that's, if you read my article, that's the day we were driving down to the coast and we saw this giant forest fire just explode on the other side of the mountain. So it just looked like this column of smoke as we're driving down. And then we were still in our state of denial, just wanting everything to be normal. So we saw this huge fire and we still went to the beach. I mean, that's the amazing thing. But in terms of air quality, from that day until today, we've had some of the worst air quality ever recorded in this city, worst in the world. I think 2 or 3 days we were worse than those cities like Delhi and India that typically have the worst air quality, and it's because we're right in the wind path coming from the ocean from all of these fires. We sometimes during the day will get more easterly going wind that will bring in the warm air from the desert, and then in the evening the ocean winds will come in and just bury us with smoke. So it's just Sunday. We were, put it this way, Saturday we thought, okay, we're back, we're safe, it's a normal life. Sunday, buried in smoke, and I'm driving around the city, and I think you just showed some of the footage, looking for a place where now we're back to the beach, but I was looking for a place where my children could breathe. We went to the old Parliament House, which is now a museum, but they had closed their doors, the air was too bad. We ended up going to a mall. But even though it's an indoor mall, the place was filled with smoke. We stayed in a hotel that night, a Crown Plaza hotel, very similar to the ones you have here with the huge atrium lobbies, filled with smoke. You guys probably monitored this in LA a little bit. 200 is considered hazardous in terms of the air quality metrics. We had 4,400 at times, and so yeah. You were just thinking, what is this? And some of the footage that I sent you guys, oh, that's an old picture. Some of the footage I sent you guys is of the fans. So when we were at the hotel, we left fans running with wet cloths over them to try to soak up some of that smoke. And when I came back, the fans are just covered with soot. So, I mean, I don't know how many people in my community in this Capital Territory are aware of the air that they're breathing right now. We just purchased a $350 air filter. I don't know how many people can afford that. But as soon as we turned on ours, it told us the air inside of our house was bad. What was the word? Poor. They said our air was poor. We've been running it all night. We just got it yesterday, and now we have the blue light instead of the red light. But yeah, it's, I'm going to try to, we've contacted our children's daycare center and said, hey, we'll put in money. We want to buy these things. I don't think people realize that smoke that's outside is actually getting inside too.
I mean, it's a big topic. We can only just briefly touch on it, but I'm curious that I know that people are still, they're not out of this yet. And God knows how long it'll last, but Have you noticed that amongst your neighbors, your friends in the area, is there more talk about putting pressure on the government to take these sorts of issues more serious? I know that the prime minister has been criticized for a number of the things that he's said and done both before the fires and even now during them. Is that something that's being talked about commonly?
You know, I mean, I think more people are just focused on dealing with the emergencies, dealing with the trauma and with the losses. If they express something political, it's more outrage, just anger, and they focus it on this one particular man. But if you were asked to ask the conservatives, they would say, we have been doing stuff, we have been trying. The question is, has it been enough? And are they happy with the results that they're getting? I think when they, when they're honest with themselves, when they stop pretending that it's normal, which I now understand is something that you just want to do in a crisis, I think that the answer might be no. But I'm not an Australian citizen, and this is the thing: is that if we're going to do something about this in this country or in the United States or anywhere, people like me who were, you call them soccer moms in the U.S., right? Those people who, it's a demographic who is more focused on their family than politics, and until something happens to really shake them out of that, well, I just want everything to be normal so I can do what I want to do. They're not that engaged. So I hadn't paid any attention to Australian politics. There was an election, but I couldn't vote. So I didn't really, look into it. I mean, now I will. I think I'll be more informed on the climate issue as well. And I guess that's the lesson for all of us here. Australia and the United States are cousins. And there's a lot of commonality. I kind of feel like I'm in the South, when I'm in Australia, and I do like being in the South. And so I think that seeing people who are so much like us go through this kind of catastrophic fire season, I think in the United States, probably in Australia too, but I'm no expert on Australia, but I think it's gonna make a difference in the United States, because I think governments and people have to stop pretending that a crisis is normal in order to confront it.
Well, Eric, we appreciate you joining us on the show today. Everyone, definitely go to The Intercept and take a look at Eric's piece about the experience he's had. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
We'll take one last break here and stick around, a bit more for you. So as Australia is still in the grip of dozens and dozens of fires, I want to talk a little bit about how some people have tried to do something good and bad people have attacked them as a result of it. So there's been a lot of fundraising around these fires, thankfully. It's one of the good things when a tragedy happens around the world. People from across the world will come together to try to help people out. And we had examples of that. So as reported by BuzzFeed News, a woman named Kaylin Ward, she's an influencer and sex worker based in LA, who sells nude photos to her followers. After reading about what was going on in Australia, she decided she wanted to do her part. So she announced on Twitter that she would DM a naked photo for every $10 someone donated to the cause. So you had to send her confirmation that you had done this donation. By her estimate, she has raised $1 million, but not without detractors, because Instagram deleted her account for violating its content policies. So she not only was attacked, I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many times online for doing this. Like, how dare you raise money in this way? But she has had to hire people to help her to sort through the DMs to see which ones are real and which are not. And by the way, like obviously this is helping her profile, it's elevating her profile, but she receives no cut of the donations. So any hiring that she does is on her own dime. And she has apparently raised over $1 million, but is experiencing bannings, as we said, on Instagram, but also Facebook, because the way that she went about the fundraising is unacceptable. They're okay with Nazis, by the way, but not okay with consensual sale of nude photos.
First off, this isn't anything new. I mean, when it's not trying to raise money for a fire, any kind of natural disaster, it's not how natural disasters, but any disasters like this around the world, when people are just making money online, and we all know that there's these entities online that sell pictures or sell their access and all this stuff. Why are we tripping that this is suddenly something because it's helping people? This actually should be
it's not classy,
thing.
Jayar.
Oh my God!
Seriously, that's like newspaper headlines about this and a couple of other influencers. Because after her, other people who are adult film stars started doing the same sort of thing. It's not classy enough.
Over $1 million, so 100,000 people were willing to give up $10 for a picture. What happened to those 100,000 people of low moral character? Go after them too. Ban them for participating, for facilitating this disastrous disgustingness online. It's already happening. Hey, newsflash. Which words can I use here? There's TNA online all over the place.
Yes.
Put it that way.
Yeah, if you, like, people are dying. 1 billion animals have died. She's trying to help. Not everybody writes poetry. I don't know what to tell you. Like, people do different things. People have different talents. And by the way, it's one of the most popular in-demand things ever across the history. Like, stop demonizing people for doing something that other people desperately want them to do.
It's like these laws against pornography, but those same people who are creating those laws are the ones who are paying for it more than anyone else.
Exactly. So thank you to Kaylin Ward and others for doing what you can to help out amidst this terrible tragedy. Leave them alone.
The tragedy of
Jayar,
news.
thank you as always. Thank you for watching. More for you tomorrow morning. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.